Hello and welcome to the Ori Spotlight podcast. This is your host, Jason Foster. This week, I have Jonathan Hay as my guest. Jonathan is a partner at Delin Ventures and also a board member at Ori. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks a lot for having me. Really a pleasure, and look forward to the discussion.
Well, thanks for joining me, and it's great to have a chance to discuss the advanced therapies sector with you. I know you've gotten very deep in this space over the last several years, and the fund generally has quite a broad interest in cell and gene therapy and advanced therapies. I'd like to start there, if you don't mind, telling us a little bit more about Delin, your focus personally and across the fund, and what kinds of things are most interesting to you guys in the advanced therapies sector today.
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that. We founded the fund together with my partner, Igor Linschitz, about 7 years ago, with a lot of advice from Christopher Spray, who was one of the founders of Atlas Ventures, and he's been with us all that period. We really started with a focus more on technology, so we were investing in software businesses, a little bit in semiconductors. But over the last 4 years, we really made the shift into biotech and healthcare-related investments, driven by where we saw an opportunity to differentiate ourselves, I think, and where also we just felt we could have more impact on the world. That's a big part of our internal DNA, and company's got a very entrepreneurial focus related to the background of its founder. And we thought there was a good fit with that in the biotech sector, where there's a lack of what I would call entrepreneurial capital. And I think that's maybe where we're a bit different from some of the other investors in the space. In terms of what we focus on, it's really early stage life science, I would say, with some areas that we're particularly interested in. One of those is really autologous cell therapies. And, Ori's been a real kind of pathfinder investment for us in terms of exploring that space. So we're looking at a lot more things, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it in terms of what's going on. In terms of what kind of investments we make, we can do seed investments like we did in Ori. We can also partner with entrepreneurs and work a much more of a partnership model. And increasingly, we're starting to build companies ourselves. So with ideas, as we learn more about a sector, we get more confidence to try and create something ourselves and begin to assemble the components to build a company from scratch.
Yeah, company creation's a little bit different than straight kind of investing, and an interesting area for us to talk about, I think, moving forward.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know that Ori has closed its Series B, participated in that, and you've been with us on the journey for several years now, having led our seed round in 2019. I'm interested in your view of kind of the Ori opportunity, maybe looking back at sort of what was compelling to lead the round in 2019, but also how it's developed over time, particularly in the context of how you see cell and gene therapy developing. I think, we see the world very similarly in how we think the industry might evolve, and the desire to bring these products to patients more quickly at a much lower cost, potentially even, leading to manufacturing, closer to the patient rather than in the centralized models today. I'm curious what, if you harken back to the first investment in Ori and then how it's continued to evolve, what are the key things you think that we're doing that's most interesting for the industry?
I'd say if I look back, we were trying to figure out how to invest in cell and gene therapy. And, there's so much going on in the space. It's an industry, it's the kind of industry we like, because we like to go into industries where there's still lots of debates about business model, lots of different debates about which technology is right. And it's much easier for an upstart like ourselves to find some novel approach. But we got frustrated really early because we couldn't really figure out how to invest in therapeutics. There were so many alternatives that we started to look for how can we invest in this industry, and how can we invest in something that's solving like a fundamental problem for the industry.
Yeah.
And that led to thinking about manufacturing. And I can remember Googling around and trying to find, Googling automated cell manufacturing and finding these pictures of what Farland taught me to call our mini oil refineries, right?
Right. Lots of tubes and pumps and all kinds of stuff. Yeah,
exactly. And I remember getting kind of depressed that I couldn't really find anything. And then we met Farland and met Ori and got a taste of his vision with a really, really kind of rethinking from the very beginning what technology would really fit the needs of this market in terms of being able to manufacture at scale, being able to create consistent process, being able to generate the types of data that would enable you to follow what's going on at different stages of development and do trials in different locations and so on and so forth. So I think that vision is what really caught us, and I think you've executed on it beautifully, and I think that we're excited about working with you and looking at other ways we can contribute to solving the problem of access to cell therapy.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what it's all about now.
Well, I think our shared kind of vision for the future and the mission of Ori resonates with you as an investor as well as, seeking to enable widespread patient access. I mean, you talked about your desire as a fund to have an impact, positive impact, and clearly it's, as I call it, an untenable outcome to have cures for cancer that patients can't get access to. And your intent as a fund to have an impact, really invest in areas that can have a positive impact is clearly, well aligned with what we're trying to do. And, interestingly, it's this dichotomy of mass personalization, being able to bring personalized precision medicines to many patients at once, and to tackle what are fundamentally new challenges for the industry. Starting with patient material as your input into your process is something that's totally new. It's been done kind of in a boutique format in transplantation or regenerative medicine at the hospital level, maybe one patient or two patients a year, very, very small volume. But how do we do that in a mass way, in a industrialized way? And this is part of our mutual shared interest. And I think when we partnered with Delin in 2019, the various pieces of the puzzle. You mentioned Christopher Spray, who's had been a longtime investor. You've got yourself. Igor being an entrepreneur himself. People like Lev and Alan Barge, who've worked in either pharma or invested in therapeutics, bringing some of those pieces together to say, well, we need a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different ways of thinking in order to try and do this. This isn't sort of another, fintech play or another, where you're just kind of rinse, repeat, do something better. So I think that's a little bit unique, is that your model is really about trying to bring some of that expertise, some of that value, some of that operational side of the house in really what could be transformative technologies and companies. Am I articulating the USP right? That's been my experience, but I wonder if that's the intent.
Yeah. No, thank you. I'm glad if we've made an impression that we're trying to bring different expertise to the table, because that certainly is our intention, and to have the people around who are specialists in their areas and can make their contribution. Because I think the area you're in, we're working in together, obviously involves many disciplines, and we need to be able to look at it from different perspectives. And it's really kind of goes back to this issue too of the ecosystem.
Yes.
That needs to come into place to make this happen and to create access.
Indeed. Yeah, and it's multidisciplinary. And I know in the early days we talked a lot about data platforms and analytics and AI, ML, and how that could be brought into, and it really wasn't even in the conversation in cell and gene 2 years ago, but we started talking about it then, and have built that into a fundamental part of the Ori platform, which is exciting. Trying to bring those disciplines from other areas, and I'm guessing one of the questions I had for you is what is unique about the investment model, and I guess it's really that. It's really sort of bringing those disciplines to bear, and what is most exciting outside of what you've seen with Ori? What's most exciting you about the opportunities for innovation in the sector?
In the sector, I guess, there's so much going on. And I think, my colleagues, you mentioned some of them, Alan Barge and Lev Osharovich, Natalia Novak, they know a lot more about what's going on the therapeutic side than I do, and would probably all have their favorite innovations that are in the pipeline. But for me, it's innovations around the concept of access. So I think it's access, but it's access on multiple dimensions. It's financial access. It's access to product, so that product is available for people. It's access at the optimal stage of treatment. If it should be a first line therapy, then the quicker we can get it there and get the cost down, so it's competitive with what's currently first line. And then it's access to the innovation. That just we know that these innovations are happening all over the world in a much different way than in the past. That medical centers are taking them much further than academic medical centers are taking them much further than in the past. And so being able to get that to patients, even at the investigative stage, I think it's very exciting. There's MD Anderson, as you know, is a powerhouse in the industry. So many trials going on, so many therapies. It'd be great if those trials, could be much more widely available, for example, and there was an infrastructure there to support that. So I'm really excited about that. Those kind of innovations around access, which I think Ori can, well power. The Ori technology and the Ori ecosystem will power those innovations. And I suppose on the therapeutic side, I'm interested in the autologous therapies that become much more personalized and precise. And that then gets to the manufacturing infrastructure again. Can we really make very personalized cell therapies and solve the manufacturing challenges that are related to that? I think we can, and I think it's happening. It's just we need to push it further and faster.
Agreed wholeheartedly. As you know, you highlighted a couple of them there, but I wonder if you'd expand on, from your perspective as an investor out there in your travels, talking to a lot of people in the ecosystem, what are the key challenges you see? Obviously, manufacturing, cost of goods are large ones. I wonder what other challenges that you see that, maybe innovators are already trying to solve or are unaddressed, at this point.
Yeah, and obviously the cost of goods is a big one. I think another big one is just the friction from the breakthrough stage to the kind of drug development stage, if you will. How do you get from the innovator into a drug development pipeline or a flow that moves to the possibility for a scalable therapy? So I think kind of where we need to get to in the industry is to a much earlier adoption of technologies like Ori at the research phase, so that that data can translate more quickly into a drug development pipeline, and into trials that can be multi-site and get to approvals faster and with repeatable data and so forth. So I think it's that friction in the process that's too high, and we need to address that.
I had this conversation with both John Connolly at Pisces, who we recently released the podcast with, and also Isabelle Riviere, who's a new advisor to Ori, who leads manufacturing at Sloan Kettering. They both had an interesting thing to say in this part of the discussion, to say, oftentimes the incentives for investigators are different than they would be for a therapy developer, right? So oftentimes grant money is the lifeblood of any investigator-led trial or some of that early work. And Isabel was really pointed on this, and she said that there's often no resources, no funding, and no time to kind of spend earlier in trying to optimize processes and trying to future-proof your manufacturing process, because it's always go, get into the clinic, enroll patients, fast. And people don't have the time necessarily or the funds, if it's an investigator-led trial, to focus on the process early enough to front run some of the issues that they know are coming downstream. It's kind of like we have to put the horse before the cart. But as you've articulated, I think if we're able to do our job at Ori and to make it easier for investigators to apply their trade, to do their drug discovery work on the platform, then potentially that de-risks that downstream. They don't have to invest a whole bunch of time and money in trying to optimize the process. It will be sort of optimized already because it's able to be administered on the platform. I don't know if I know you talk to a lot of investigators and therapy developers out there. Does that gel with kind of what you're hearing, what your experience is?
Yeah, completely. And I think the system has to offer value to the researcher early. So, it could be on the data side, for example, if you're linked up with their with their current, framework for keeping track of bench data and automatically goes in and you're solving a headache for them, then I think that's really cool. That's going to help people adopt. I think it probably also is if more of the manufacturing infrastructure and related services are kind of co-located with some of these academic medical centers. I think having just the proximity of people will cause people to think in an earlier way about some of these issues and have the kind of the human capital and specialists around to help them more quickly adopt some of those things. But fundamentally, we've got to offer something of value to the researcher, and I suspect it's going to be around the data side and around the ease of using the equipment and the ability to repeat experiments in a way that removes variables.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think that's the frustrating thing as a researcher is you're always trying to figure out why did it go wrong, and in this particular case, and right in that particular case. And the more I've got the data and feedback and maybe learning from the system to help me decipher that, the more value add I see in the technology.
Yeah, 100%. And that kind of giving a new layer of insights into causality, into what's actually happening in the process. Right now, I think investigators often feel like they're flying blind and they're not 100% sure why things are happening the way they are, and trying to do their best to figure out what are those, critical quality attributes or the sort of key things that are driving efficacy downstream, or what they're seeing in the process. But oftentimes they don't have the data they need to even make those decisions.
Right.
So they're making educated guesses, which hopefully we can improve upon.
There's so much learning researchers can get from other researchers too. So if we can find a way to share that data early, and somebody over here is fiddling around with the T cell expansion and they can't get it to work right in their lab, or they're getting low yields, that they get some insights maybe from somebody else who's fiddling around with something similar with T cells. So if we can find a way to share that data without people being concerned about, their proprietary stuff, then that would be huge.
Exactly. And to the point you raised about kind of time to market, and, is shaving off 6 months or a year in process development where we can help, accelerate that. We can run things in parallel. We can share, sort of aggregate the data, allow for those insights to be derived more quickly. And then maybe you're able to recruit patients faster because you can do it at multiple sites, and that shaves a year or two. And then you can, tech transfer doesn't take 6 months any longer. It takes 6 weeks. And then, the regulatory package is there. If you add all those kind of time savings up, potentially what's now a 10-year process or even longer, is something much less than that. If we can shave 3 years or 4 years off the process, wow, that's a huge savings for companies and the investments they need to make, and an unbelievable outcome for patients who might not have had an option, but that option might come to market much more quickly. So ultimately, therein lies the impact we're all trying to have, is to ultimately get these products to patients much more quickly and much more affordably.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we're at that stage in the industry where I think you said it earlier, it's moving from the cottage industry to sort of the industrialization phase, if you will. And, can we do that and get all those efficiencies that you were just talking about to do things more quickly?
Exactly. And, you'll have seen some recent guidance from the FDA last week to go along with some guidance that the MHRA from the UK put out last year, very similar, kind of asking the industry for comment around, what does good look like? How should we be moving the industry forward? Think topics such as decentralized manufacturing were covered there. What is your thought on some of these elements that may or may not need to evolve? Where do you see the innovation needing to come from? What are the low-hanging fruit from your perspective? And knowing that, we don't have all the pieces in place yet, but it seems as though, there's some common threads, around the world in the industry of where we think we want to get to.
Yeah, really good question. I guess for me, and I'm constantly trying to get feedback from others on this in terms of where can you add value quickly to be able to make progress quickly and get people to buy into the vision here. I am very, you mentioned the regulatory stuff. I am very pleased to see that, the FDA put out that guidance, which explicitly talks about multi-site manufacturing. So that clearly is in the thinking now. And you mentioned the MHRA guidance as well, talking about point of care manufacturing. So clearly the regulators are moving in that direction. And in some countries, I think in Holland, for example, they've gone even further in terms of really encouraging the use of the therapies that are still in investigator-led trials because they're locally manufactured. I think that in terms of low-hanging fruit, I think it's probably in finding a way to install the sort of minimal platform that gets buy-in in multiple locations, and getting the data and allowing people to see the benefits of the data that's generated in multiple locations, where you're measuring the same things. You're measuring the same things that go in, the same things that come out, measuring the process as it goes along, and being able to learn from that. And I think the effect of that will be so powerful when it happens that will generate a lot of further thoughts about, we could do this or we could do that. And, then it will start to take a life of its own. So I'm really excited to see you guys moving in that direction, and, the interactions you guys have been having. But I think that's where the low hanging fruit is.
Yeah. We had a conversation, it's probably last week now, with a gentleman called Boro Drapulic from Caring Cross, and he'd published some work that they had done, essentially doing that, a parallel trial. I think it was in Moscow actually, and in Cleveland, if I remember correctly, demonstrating that if they put the same inputs in and they run the same process, they get the same outputs out, pretty much. And being able to demonstrate, we're on the track to demonstrate a similar thing with some of Ori's partners, as, multi-site, maybe East Coast and West Coast of the US, or, maybe even in Europe as well, and then one in the US, just demonstrate that we can do this. Today, a multi-site trial in advanced therapies is almost unthinkable. It's just too hard to pull off, but that's where we have to start. As you said, we have to generate that data, show it's possible, and then show we can do it in a repeatable, reliable, safe and high quality way. But that kind of methodology isn't beyond our reach, I don't think. I think we're moving fast in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're near it, and you're near to doing that. And I think it's just a matter of proving it, because I'm sure if you talk to people about doing that, many people say it's not going to happen. It's too complicated. You can't even do it in one location. How can we do it in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? But in fact, I guess you just have to do it and measure and show that it can be done. And then I think the other thing that will happen is once that's been shown to be possible, and you mentioned the paper, I think you sent it to me, and I did look at it. It's great, great example. But as that's shown, then people are going to start thinking, oh yeah, okay, so I guess it does work, but maybe we should measure this, and maybe we should measure that. And then people will start thinking differently when they design therapies as well, about how should they be thinking about design so that they can measure the right things in multiple sites. And then I think you'll see a lot of improvements come quickly in terms of the multi-site model.
No, it's a great segue to the kind of next point I wanted to ask you about, which is, we've been celebrating the small wins, as any industry that's, nascent or relatively early in its development should. The product entering a clinical trial, an IND or NDA submission, these things are to be celebrated. And we've had, in the last couple of years, we've had, several approvals of additional CAR T products. The first, BCMA product, the first products in multiple myeloma. So these are milestones for the industry for sure. I guess, at some point we have to stop crawling and start walking, and then stop walking and start running. What are the right benchmarks? As we look forward, my concern, which I've articulated several times on this podcast, is that we can't just rest on our laurels there. The measuring stick that I think should be the benchmark of success is how many patients are successfully treated. And that should be the thing that we hold ourselves accountable to. But I wonder what your thought is. It's maybe non-traditional. I think, oftentimes in the therapeutics world, people celebrate the first clinical trial enrollment. That's a press release, and an IND submission. That's a press release. And but I think we're at the point where we need to be able to prove that we can allow patients or access to these therapies and really generate a market access success and a commercial success where we are able to treat large numbers of patients.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like your benchmark about number of people treated, and I think it be worth kind of developing that thought further, and maybe thinking about some other kind of related benchmarks. I mean, you could look at in terms of getting innovation to market. I think the benchmark might be how many people are clinically eligible for treatment, and then we look at, of those who are eligible, how many actually did get access. So we've got both, because access, I think, is both about getting the stuff to market, and then it's making sure the product is available for people, financially available, geographically available, whatever availability means. So we probably need to do a little report card for the industry, I think, and figure out what those numbers are. Probably need a metric related to sort of academic breakthrough to approval. How are we doing on that? And then approval to scaled therapy. So I think there are probably a few there, but at the end of the day, they're all about how well did we do in terms of actually getting them to the patients who need them. It's just different ways of looking at that.
I mean, you probably wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, you'd be surprised at how hard it is to even find the denominator of that equation. How many patients are eligible to get CAR T therapy. In this case, we did a bit of research in trying to find the answer to this question, at least to some extent that's data backed with data. And we found a couple reports, one from McKinsey, sort of, or maybe up to 900,000 or 1 million patients that would be eligible for some of the first generation CAR T products. And then we tried to find, for the numerator, there was a couple different publications that said, well, 2,000 patients have been treated, and then in another geography or, holistically doing a meta-analysis, 10,000 patients have been treated, in perpetuity or throughout history in clinical trials. But there's no really good way to track either the denominator or the numerator. I think if we were to do it, from all the evidence we've seen, we'd be pretty depressed about the outcome. I think it's less than 2% of the patients that are eligible have actually been able to access therapies. And I know some of our advisors who I quoted that number to were A, incredulous that it was that low, and B, when they looked at the numbers, said that's incredibly depressing. But I think also we've had some very large indications recently approved. Multiple myeloma is a large indication, greater than 30,000 patients a year. The first year of Abecma's launch, the data suggests they treated 300 patients. And in the second year, their ambition is to treat 700 based on their public disclosures. And these are, still less than 1% of the patient population that's available to them. So, as an industry, I think it's a rational, reasonable discussion for us to have of what success looks like and how we then set ourselves up for success moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I wouldn't, I think just from talking to clinicians who sort of, know their areas well, I'm not surprised that the numbers are quite small in terms of the people who are getting access who are technically eligible, let's say, from a clinical point of view.
Agreed. And I think potentially some of that answers my next question, which is, we see a lot of innovation now. There's a lot of innovation happening in cell and gene therapy on new platforms for, cells, identifying new cell types or new ways to genetically reprogram cells or target them or make them more durable, or all those things that we need to do to make really more effective therapeutics. But what would you consider to be kind of true innovation? When you look out there in the world, you're talking to therapy developers, you're talking to technologists, people that are trying to solve problems all along the value chain. What, in your view, is holding us back? We talked about cost of goods, certainly, and that's a all-encompassing topic. But is there a mindset shift that needs to happen? Is there, if you had to highlight one or two things that's really holding the industry back right now, what would you put your finger on to say that's where the innovation really needs to be targeted?
You could say another CD19 is not innovative at all, but a CD19 that was 10 times cheaper and 10 times more accessible would be a true innovation. So I think true innovation needs to come in business model. It needs to come, also on the therapeutic side, but I think there's lots of that happening. There's lots of breakthrough innovation happening on the biology side. So I think that's and it's becoming much more democratized. Happening all over the world, and many kind of every major academic medical center. If you dig in, you'll start to find really innovative stuff happening on the biology side in terms of cell therapies, with so many new tools coming. So I'd say the innovations really are around how do we make this pragmatically, available for people? What are the technologies needed to do that? So I think that's a big part of it. I think the use of data is also, a huge part of it. Just, ways that we can use data, also ways that we can use data and data, mining around the biology to figure out what sort of combinations really could be used, because so much stuff is out there and available, but what should we be combining cell therapies with to address the tumor microenvironment, for example? Why can't we make faster progress with solid tumors? We know a lot of it is the suppressive effect of the tumor microenvironment on the immune cells. Why there are combinations that can address it. So I know people are doing that, but I just my point is more around data and doing it as rationally as possible, and looking at lots of combinations as well, but in a rational way.
Yeah, and decreasing the kind of cycle times, and using some of the tools we have available to us. You see tools like advanced analytics like multivariate analysis or machine learning being applied in lots of industries, lots of regulated industries, and all kinds of applications. We're still in paper batch records for the most part. It's going to be extremely difficult to utilize any tools like that, if not impossible, unless we get to a fully digital footprint that we can actually, it's sort of, we sort of shorthand inside Ori say paper is the enemy of scale. The ability to have a 200-page paper batch record being leafed through by a QP in Europe to release one product, no matter how good your process is up front. You can shorten the cycle times. You can take a 14-day process and cut it down to 3 and do all kinds of efficiencies there. But if you have to fly it halfway across the world, and if you have to have a human being batch release it, you're stuffed, because there aren't enough people out there to do that work. So this kind of idea where, I think people think about a digital or paperless manufacturing process as a nice to have, and it's something that we'll get to eventually, versus something they need to focus on up front. And, that's one of the things that Kevin, as you know, our chief data officer, is working on quite extensively with partners, is how do we build a paperless manufacturing tech stack that can essentially act as a turnkey foundation for therapy developers to get there right away. Because there's no reason why you have to start in paper. It's just what everyone does, because that's what we're used to. But if we can make it easy to start digitally, then you can get some of these benefits right out of the gate.
I agree with you, and I think that again goes back to your comment about the low-hanging fruit. But I think that we got to, it's kind of boring in a way to say that we're still using paper and we need to get away from it, when some other industries have, done that successfully. So I think, but you're right, it's absolutely essential. And it's about, getting it all more efficient and getting people out of their silos as well, because the digital, world can connect everyone to each other so much more efficiently. So I agree that in itself is a huge innovation. And once people feel the impact of that, they're going to wonder how they did it any other way. How was it possible?
No, it's funny. I mean, I think those people that have made the move, and one of the things that always comes up when we talk about some of these issues like decentralized manufacturing, for example, people say, what about QA and QC? How are we going to batch release these? Because you're used to having a centralized resource that does that. And that's usually the first thing that pops out of people's mouths. But then you talk to people who've actually made the shift, some of the pioneers in the industry who've gone paperless already, and their QA and QC team wouldn't go back. Like, now we can demonstrate with an immutable record to a regulator or someone else exactly what happened, and it's all right here. And we don't have that, you don't have to print out reams and reams and store them in a file cabinet. So we'll get there. I have no doubt about it. But it's really about trying to make it as easy as possible. Part of what we view our job at Ori is to make it as easy as possible. Turnkey. Let's do the heavy lifting ahead of time. Let's work with the other partners, people like TrackCell's, other partners in the ecosystem that are doing their piece of the puzzle well, and take some of that integration burden off of our partners, our customers, because ultimately therapy developers, are they great at software integration? Well, they've probably had to be, but it's not because that's their core competency. If we can move away from that, then we can just make that lift much lighter and make it much easier to get there. And the point you raised, which I think is super interesting, which is also when we talk about gathering data, structuring it, aggregating in the cloud, applying analytics, and then delivering back insights to therapy developers, the immediate response is therapy developers don't want to share their data. I say, yep, that traditionally has been the case. I understand that. And we're not sharing anyone's data with anyone else. But if we can deliver valuable insights by having their data in our cloud analytics platform that helps move their process forward by a year or two, I think we can make a value proposition to say it's worth it. And so that's, it's those mindsets,
I agree with that, and I agree with that passionately. And I think we're incubating a company on the therapy side now, and there's some huge process challenges. And I just think about, if you could give me some insights, I don't need anyone's data, but I need a few insights around some of the things we're doing. And if we did it this way, what would your system tell me? That would be hugely valuable. And my willingness to share data with you to in return for getting those insights would be kind of a no-brainer from my point of view. So I think there's some nuances to work out in terms of how you share and what you share, but I think it's a solvable problem, and there's so much win-win for everyone that it's going to happen. It's just going to happen.
We just have to make it valuable enough to overcome the risk aversion, which we all understand.
Risk aversion, exactly. The paranoia that people have about sharing.
Indeed. Yeah. And it's maybe an interesting segue to the next question I had for you, which is really where you see the inflection point coming. What is the inflection point do you think that's going to catalyze a shift in the way the industry is thinking about some of these issues? For me, I can imagine that there was a benchmark put out there by Scott Gottlieb and Peter Marks a couple of years ago in a publication saying that their hope is by 2025, the agency is approving 20 to 25 new cell and gene therapies every year. And that, we as an industry sort of look at that and say, oh no, that would be a disaster because we wouldn't be able to treat any patients. There'd be, each of those therapies be treating, tens of patients, and that wouldn't be a good outcome. But what do you think will be the inflection point that really helps the industry want to leap forward from here, from where we are today?
I mean, I think, and maybe this is a little bit our perspective on it at Delin, but we think the industry has kind of swung towards allogeneic therapies, which of course are very promising and very exciting, but they're not real yet, and they're going to take some time because of the challenges of durability and overcoming immune reaction and so on. But it's swung away from autologous therapies. But autologous therapies are the ones that have been approved. They're the ones that are the here and now of the industry. And so I think the sort of tipping point, if you will, or the inflection point will be when we can show that the manufacturing side of that really is scalable in any context, in any indication. But just to show that it's really scalable, we really can solve that problem. I think there'll be a huge tipping point when that happens, and it'll be a tipping point back towards the autologous therapies that are working, and the innovation around the world where you have investigator-led trials with similar therapies, innovative therapies that are working in people, but there's a lot of skepticism about autologous therapies as being really a solution because of the manufacturing problems. So I think we need to show that can be solved in some context, and then I think that'll be a huge inflection point for the industry and a great benefit for patients, because we'll be able to then take the therapies that are working and have proven in humans and be able to really scale them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think the investment community has shifted to a massive amount of investment into allogeneic approaches. But if you look at the distribution of kind of clinical trials, it's still a very, very small percentage of the therapies.
Yeah, correct.
Because we're trying to find a way to solve this manufacturing dilemma. So if we can prove it's solvable,
exactly.
I think you're right. It then sort of smooths out some of the other pieces of the puzzle we're trying to solve for. And I think also an area that, gets talked about a lot is, genetic reprogramming and viral vector manufacturing and the challenges with that and the expense of that. And being able to see some of these new modalities, call them transfection technologies or others. There's some new electroporation out there. There's different approaches to that. There's other ways to break down the cell membrane and get the DNA inside. I think if we're able to think differently about and maybe higher throughput, higher quality, more reliable, lower cost methods to do the gene editing or the genetic reprogramming, that'll be a huge help as well. We know if we look at the cost of goods for, let's say, a traditional first generation CAR T product, almost, let's say, a third or 25% of the cost is vector. And the rest is basically labor and other inputs. If we can address those simultaneously, that will be a big step forward in trying to get where we want to go.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's a lot of investment in that area. So we should keep our eye on that and be ready to adopt early if something is proving effective, safe, and a lot cheaper than vectors. But vector price is coming down as well, since there's a lot of investment in that. So
it is.
I'm pretty optimistic about that aspect of things becoming quite competitive, and there being multiple ways to do it that are safe, efficient, and cost effective.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, I think we talk about there's multiple ways to solve some of these problems, and we need to kind of parallelize the approaches so we can get multiple answers to these questions. So we're coming to the hour, and I greatly appreciate your time that you spent with us. One last question I'd like to ask of you is really just to try and it's an easy question. I'm asking you to predict the future, so that should be easy for you. Looking in the 5 to 10 year time horizon, what does good look like from your perspective for the industry? This is a question I ask all my guests because it's really, I think, interesting to explore where our ambition is. And I'd be interested from an investment perspective or from an industry stakeholder perspective. What does good look like from your perspective for cell and gene within the next kind of 5 to 10 year time frame?
I think in that time frame, success for me would see the ecosystem in place to actually solve the accessibility problem we've been talking about, and that we would think of cell therapies sort of the way we think of small molecules and antibodies in terms of accessibility. They're just there, and we can get them when we need them. That for me would be success.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's a little bit of right now it's I don't know what the opposite of a virtuous cycle is, a non-virtuous cycle, in that, we are taking, because these products are so expensive, we're forced to have them be last line therapy. And for patients to have failed 4 or 5 different rounds of therapy, patients are often very sick. And so by the time they get to the point where they could benefit from a cell therapy, they're often at their sickest, and their immune cells, by definition, are at their weakest, and therefore probably have the lowest chance of having a good clinical outcome because of that. And so by reversing that point and to your ambition is, if we can drop cost of goods and or move these products much earlier in the treatment pathway because they're affordable, we should be able to improve clinical outcomes and actually improve patients' results because we've got healthier immune cells to use and derive our therapeutic from. So we should be able to start a virtuous cycle from there, where we get better outcomes and more patients are treated, and we see better results. And that would be my sort of offshoot of your vision. I think ultimately, the ability to treat more patients, absolutely, the ability to access these widely, but also earlier in the treatment pathway so we can have, better clinical outcomes.
Yeah, completely agree. And it's very interesting that patients who have had so many lines of treatment yet respond so well in some cases. And you think if that could only be done earlier, what would that mean in terms of outcomes?
100%. Well, it's been fantastic chatting with you. I really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Really appreciated speaking with you today.